Hello and welcome to The Nonprofits, the weekly recorded show that addresses current events and news from an atheist and secular humanist perspective. Cynthia today is going to lead us on some updates from yet another church scandal.
Well, Rob, today we're examining the case of Robert Morris, a once powerful megachurch pastor who used his influence to help Donald Trump court evangelical voters, who preached for decades about morality and purity, and who is now indicted on 5 counts of child sexual abuse. This abuse began when the victim, Cindy Clemshire, was just 12 years old, and Morris was in his 20s. For years, he hid behind religious language, church leadership, and political connections, while his victim carried the trauma. Now, even as he faces criminal charges, Morris is demanding millions in retirement benefits from the very church that pushed him out, not for sin, but for crimes. The story is about abuse, cover-up, and the evangelical machine that rewards predators while silencing survivors. The story is from the Friendly Atheist by Hemant Mehta on May 19th, 2025. Back to you, Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. So this is awful, and it's reoccurring, and it continues to happen. But you had a clause there, a phrase I really liked, which was the evangelical machine that rewards predators and silencing survivors. So I want to hit up Eli and ask a very specific question. What happens? What do you think happens when people are held more accountable to their God rather than the real life victims? The reason why I'm asking, the more applicable reason is, how is it that someone might believe that this could be a correct position? Do you think that they don't believe that? What happens when God gets involved and real people are hurt?
I think you get exactly like Robert Morris and the machine that Cynthia mentioned, and that was, I agree, really eloquently put. I think Robert Morris felt entitled to assault a 12-year-old girl. And more than once over a 5-year period. And he felt entitled to coerce her and threaten her into silence so that she, in the words of the article, in her own words, she said that he told her that if she said anything, she would ruin everything. So he felt entitled to do it, to coerce her into silence. And then to go on 35 years later and act like he's annoyed that it's coming up again, because he feels like he's already atoned for this. He feels like, well, God forgave me and the family forgave me. So why are we still talking about this? And the two things I want to talk about there are that there's not really, that I'm aware of, like a mechanism for measuring God's forgiveness. As far as I can tell, it's functionally indistinguishable from just like acknowledging that you did something wrong. Once you say, oh man, you know what? Yeah, that wasn't the right thing to do. Now God has forgiven me and I'm good and I don't have to do anything. And then the other thing that I want to talk about is the forgiveness that the family said, that Cindy Clemshire, in her own words, says the family gave Robert Morris, because what she said is that they are compelled to biblically forgive those that sin against us. And I think that is a dangerous idea that only serves to benefit those being forgiven, not those forgiving, because it gives those that have wronged you, or those that are being forgiven, the impression that, I did a bad thing, but it's okay now because I was forgiven. And I don't think you have to forgive people. I think there's a difference between holding a grudge and not forgiving. And I think not forgiving is just setting a boundary and saying like, yeah, that's how you treated me and that's not acceptable and you need to be held accountable.
I think I've been talking to some people recently, and I used the word inconsiderate. And I think when a lot of people say the word inconsiderate, what they mean is some level of dismissal, where they're just like, I am being rude to you. But when I say that, what I mean is like literally not thinking about it. It is a lack of consideration. Therefore, what I'm kind of thinking about with that is, do you think that they're even considering their victim? Because they are going through the process of, oh, I'm being forgiven, but they're not talking to the actual victims. In this case, they were like, we don't like what he's done. We don't forgive him, but he keeps talking about as if he's forgiven. Do you think he actually is? Like, Cynthia, what do you think? We can't understand what's in his brain, but is there any way for us to think that he's even thinking about the victim as a person at all? Does it even matter? Does that question make sense?
Well, I think that this goes beyond that because it speaks to a more pervasive problem. See, this story is not just about Robert Morris and his crime that he did. It's really about the system that's protecting him. You know, for years, he stood on stages, he preached morality while still abusing a child. And I think that that's something that we need to really think about. And when his survivor, Cindy, actually came out and actually forwarded her story, it wasn't the church that supported her. It was law enforcement.
Yeah.
And I think it also speaks very much so to how we've covered stories like this in the past, and how it's always a victim blame instead of victim protection versus the one who's actually doing the abuse, and also the system or the organization of the church that's like, shielding them from any type of accountability whatsoever. And I think that the response from Gateway Church is really telling. They let him resign quietly. They never informed the public about his allegations, and they handed him a golden parachute. And now, even as he faces felony charges, he's demanding more money, not because he's destitute, it's because he believes that he's owed. And the entitlement when it comes to this entire thing is astounding. Oh, I founded the church, therefore I deserve something, as like, you were asking Eli previously.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the most vulnerable is who you decided to abuse for your own personal ingratiation. And now we are here where, people now know what you did, and you still feel I'm still entitled to this because I was the pastor, I was the bishop, I was the apostle, I was whatever title that was bestowed upon me at that time. And therefore I deserve this, regardless of if I did harm to somebody else.
So I want to be really clear and say the harm is real. This is unacceptable in every way. So is there a world where the church lets him resign, or maybe quietly pushes him out and accepts his resignation, that sort of thing? We all acknowledge that the assault happened. It is wrong and disgusting. And yet, does he not have a leg to stand on saying, I founded the Gateway Church and I would like compensation for the thing that I literally founded? Is that not fair? Anyone? Eli, what do you think? No, you don't like it? Why not? He made it. It's his.
Well, according to in the article, they talk about, I think, a contract that he has with the board, the church board, or the church's governing body, that says he will comport himself in a manner that he will comport himself in a manner that represents the church's values and things that they stand for. And the message that they put out when they found out the details, once the victim came forward and the details became available that way, they put out a message to their church saying, hey, this is what we were told. He did not tell us. Like the message that he gave to the church when he started is that, hey, there was a thing back in my early 20s. I had an inappropriate relationship with a young lady, made it seem like it was just an extramarital affair. He said, it wasn't intercourse, but there was kissing and petting, and it wasn't appropriate. And I've been forgiven by God, and the family has forgiven me. And exactly. I've been forgiven, and I've worked with God, and I've been super duper great at doing the right thing ever since, which I don't know how, like, that seems to be the pattern, is like, find out that something bad happened, give them a slap on the wrist, send them to some other, pastor that has been just pastoring longer to give them Jesus counseling, God counseling, to figure out how to get right with and get forgiven by God, and then make them promise super duper hard that they're not going to do it again, which is, I don't understand how that's functionally any different from like just the standard expectation that was already in place, that you just don't do it to begin with, because not only legally, but according to your doctrine, it's just not a good thing to do, and it's harmful to people.
Well, that seems to be the most disgusting part, right? Because you're right. He was told that you need to act and comport yourself in such a certain way that aligns with church values. Then he didn't. And then that's why I wanted to ask that question, because it just makes it even more disgusting to come back after the fact and say, no, I made this, so I want to have money about it. Even though he not only broke his legal obligation to them, but just morally. So then here's my question then. Most people are religious. This is just simply true. And of the people who are religious, most of them are not pastors, people who lead a congregation. Therefore, these are our literal moral leaders, many people's leadership from which they learn their morals. So if these are the people that people are learning what is right and wrong from, what is their duty? If this is what Robert Morrison is going to act like, what should his parishioners do? What is everyone else's obligation? Cynthia, what do you think of that?
It kind of reminds me of how in the evangelical church, and I don't want to put all churches into this bucket, only because, some churches do have boards where the pastor or leader is accountable to whatever type of, church rules are over it, right? But unfortunately, when you have a church that is founded by a single person, then that person gets elevated, whether they are realizing it or not, to like God status. And in that particular point of view from the parishioner, then you can't question the man of God. You cannot question what they do. You can't question the things that they say. And therefore, if they happen to be involved in some type of I can't say the word,
Propriety.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Impropriety. Thank you. My tongue just was not fixing with my words there. Then okay, you get the touch not my anointed, do my prophets no harm thing, right? And I think that that's wildly irresponsible on the parishioner's part, because I think of it in some ways. I mean, it's irresponsible on the leadership's part, but it's irresponsible to those who sit on the pews too. And I'll tell you why. Because, like in our as citizens, we are responsible for selecting the leaders that are over us, that represent us when we send them to different offices when it comes to creating laws and governing. Mm-hmm. And if they are not performing the duties that they're supposed to perform, then we have an equal responsibility to make sure that, we are doing our due diligence to make sure that we are getting somebody else to replace them if they're not doing their job. Right. That does not happen readily in the evangelical church. And a lot of times it's because their indoctrination is that the man of God is like the Pope. He is above reproach, no matter what he does. And we have to make some type of excuses for him. And in turn, like I mentioned previously, the entitlement that the man of God, the pastor, has, because this particular, thought pattern has been bestowed upon him, is that regardless of what I do or I say or anything like that, I'm entitled to X, Y, and Z. and you can't take that away from me. And I think that at this particular time, we need to really have a conversation with church folk and say, like, listen, you really need to, to ring in your pastors. You really need to, I mean, because of the things that, may have happened to the point where they are causing harm to the people that's in their pew.
Well, you make a good point about the distinction between government and religious leaders who are usually not elected. And I think that's a really good point, because I think a lot of people who are, especially in, like, let's say the right, and are very right leaning in their religiosity, that indoctrination is there. But historically, there have been people who schism, right? Like Luther is kind of like a really good example of a guy who said, I don't like what they're doing, and then they did something about it. So we know in some way that the parishioners, the people who are churchgoers and attending and listening to these moral leaders, can do something about it. I just wonder why they're not doing anything about it now. But Eli, I did have a question for you, because you did say you were talking about how there was repeated assaults with this person specifically, by Robert Morris. And so if Robert Morris, who is a moral leader, teaching people how to act, and says, oh, I'm forgiven, that's it. Do you think that repeat offenses, someone who does this continuously, because that's what he did, that's a feature of the system in which that he has created, or is he a opportunity attacker? Like, has he created a system where he gets to do it, or is he just taking advantage?
I don't know if he has created the system necessarily, because if that were the case, then we would only have seen this in Robert Morris between 1982 and 1987. Oh,
shucks. Right? It's not just him.
Yeah, there's at least one other, there is a non-zero amount of additional examples, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think certainly he's taking advantage of a system, because, like, I started to kind of mention it earlier, and it was accidentally getting off topic, but I'm glad it came up now. That there's not really a system for, like, holding people accountable for wrongdoing, especially, like, there's this idea. And I can't, I know that I've heard it in my life that, like, oh, well, like, they might have done a bad thing, but they're a good person. And, like, to some degree, like, like I dropped my empty water bottle on the ground, and I was in a rush, so I didn't go back to pick it up. And so I littered on accident. Like, a person can be a good person and circumstantially litter, and I'm not going to, like, condemn them for it. But when you have something like this, you now have evidence that, like, no, that person's actually not a good person. And because of the thing that you're talking about and what you're trying to excuse them from, with the excuse that they're a good person. So the idea is that the embarrassment of having been found out and the embarrassment of having been caught is enough of a punishment. And that's, I think, what is sort of perpetuated by this sort of, like, well, we're going to ask you to resign, we're going to make you go to counseling, but we're not going to report you to the police. And it's like Cindy Clemisher, when she was, I guess, 17, was when the abuse seems to have ended. She told her dad, found out about it. So I don't know if he found out circumstantially or if she told him, but she, I can imagine, assumed that was the moment in which something was going to be done about it. And although maybe the abuse stopped, it was another 28 years until 2005 when she finally brought charges forward against the guy that did it. So that's why he, like I said at the beginning, he's annoyed that this is coming up again. And that's why he feels like he deserves that, that retirement, that $1 million, and then the $600,000 a year, for the rest of his life from Gateway Church, because he founded it. But it's Cynthia
founded a bad thing. And then you conducted yourself badly in that thing.
Right. And the only reason he had to found this, or to start this church, was because he lost his previous job in his ministry because of what he was doing to this 12-year-old girl, 12 to 17-year-old girl.
Yeah. It's almost like it's a pattern.
Yeah. Almost like.
I really like how you said that there aren't systems in place to help with victims like this, because within the article, something that stuck out to me was Robert Morris is trying to force the Gateway Church to use their own faith-based arbitration about his demands for additional money. And now they're not. They're trying to get the courts to fight it. So, oh boy, the secular people now need to get involved. But why couldn't they do that beforehand? Why can't they actually clean house? But when it turns time to actually do something about it, they got to turn to non-religious systems. The entire thing is disgusting.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, too, I think I was actually a little bit, and maybe I missed something that you didn't, and that's why we're seeing it differently. But like, I was a little bit impressed with what I understood Gateway Church to have done, because as I understood it, they found out that there were all but like 3 board members that did know additional details about the abuse beyond the very vague, non-damning statement that Morris had given them when he became the pastor. Yeah. So there were all but 3 board members that knew about it, and they got rid of all of them except those 3. And I don't know how they confirmed that those 3 didn't know about it, but they weren't able to confirm that they did. So everybody that they knew about it is gone, as I understand it. So I was impressed with that.
I was too, but then there just ends up being like too little too late. Like they're trying to get rid of it, which is nice because it never should have happened in the first place. But at some point, it's just like, when do you even get rid of it? Cynthia.
Yeah.
I just want to ask Cynthia, as just closing idea, is there a time to get rid of a church because it's too rotten to the core? Is that even feasible?
Unfortunately, the Christian church is very much so ingrained in society. So trying to just kind of get rid of it all the way is going to be, I don't think it's going to be tenable. But what I do think is that the more we inject secularism into society, that more people are going to fall away. And hopefully the church just fades into the past.
Yeah, the best that we can do is just continue to give information, point out wrongdoings, and say that people should be doing better. But that's going to be it for this one. If you would like to do better, then you can click the doobly-doo down below and watch more of the nonprofits.